Hello and welcome. My name's Andy Crook, and my mission is to help garage owners become more successful in business. And how do I do that? I go live most weeks on a topic from one of the 5 pillars of business as I see it. And this week we're in the planning pillar, and we're talking about time. Time is like money. You can spend it, waste it, or invest it. You can buy just about anything, but you can't buy time. So let's make sure that you're using it wisely. Have you ever wondered where the day went? One minute you were opening up, and the next minute saying goodbye to the staff. Well, at least that's how it felt. Everything you set out to do was still incomplete, and the to-do list somehow now has extra items on it. Yet you'd been busy. You'd hardly stopped all day, but you still ended up going backwards. Now, this is a common story, and one that happens in lots of garages. Time is simply spent on the wrong tasks. I did a training topic on this, and I called it the Eisenhower Matrix. And it explained that we spend too much time on urgent, not important tasks, and not enough time on urgent, important tasks. If your day is taken up with urgent, important tasks, what we normally call firefighting, then you have a big problem. One that needs sorting out immediately because it is indeed urgent and important. And if your day is taken up with not urgent, not important tasks, then you've either cracked the business code or you've retired. The 80-20 rule suggests that 80% of the output comes from just 20% of the inputs. If we only knew what to focus the 20% of our time on, we could achieve just about anything. But it isn't as simple as that. So let's get stuck right in. Now, I believe the ideal split of resources is 70-20-10. And that if you run a business that's in infancy, and we've done a training topic on the stages of business, an infancy basically is a business that if the owner isn't there, it'll stop almost immediately. So if you are running a business in infancy, you should be spending 70% of your time as the technician, 20% as the manager, and 10% as the entrepreneur. So to break that down, that's 14 days a month in the business and 6 on the business. And by on the business, I mean activities that have nothing to do with the day-to-day operations. Not just not fixing cars, but also not ordering parts or dealing with customers. Those days working on the business are broken down into 4 days managing and 2 days every month thinking, planning, and just making decisions. Now, very, very few businesses in infancy will be spending that amount of time on the business. And that's the problem. Now, once your business moves into adolescence, now adolescence is what I call the danger zone. In adolescence, you've probably taken on staff and the business is sort of working without you. But if you're not there, the business will grind to a halt. It doesn't stop immediately, but it'll grind to a halt. Now, if you're in adolescence, the percentages need to shift again. And they need to move more towards a 50-20-30 sort of model. And in maturity, and a business in maturity is one that will just carry on even if you're not there, you will be spending 70% or more of your time just being entrepreneurial. But that's the ideal use of resources, 70-20-10. Now, time is a finite resource, yet so few of us actually bother to find out how we are using it. Because in our businesses and at home, we'll have gas meters, electricity meters, we have bank accounts, and we even know how much fuel our vehicles use just by looking at the MPG. So why is it so uncommon to measure how we use our time? Because we know we're not making the best use of this precious resource, is always my best guess. But time and time again, when I speak to business owners, they don't know where their day went. They don't know how they use this precious resource. So how can it be measured in your business? Well, one task I get business owners to do is to set up a spreadsheet. And they split up the working day into 30-minute blocks. And then they turn that into a spreadsheet over the week. And then I get people to record the activity across each 30-minute block by recording which quadrant they operated in during that time. Now, what happens is most people, there's a certain amount of, shall we say, pushback and resistance to doing this task, because most people think they spend most, if not all of their time, doing stuff. But doing what? And that's the point. So if you do nothing but you do this, you will find some interesting insight into how you spend or use your time. And I urge you to do this for a week. Set a timer on your phone and record how you spend your time every 30 minutes. Because this is where it gets interesting. Was that time spent, invested, or simply wasted? And how did you stack up against my ideal of 70% of your time is spent, 20% is invested, and just 10 was wasted? Now, when you do this and you look into how you're spending your time, the temptation is you think all of your time was spent. And I used to get people just to write S, I, or W in the cell on the spreadsheet. But what I found was, and as I've just said, most people just put S everywhere. They think they spend all of their time. All of the time is on task. Or what task was more difficult to work out. But what we really need is something a little bit simpler. So what I got them to do, and this is at a basic level, if you're spending time on task, what quadrant did you sit in on the Eisenhower matrix? Now, you don't need to go back and look at the trainer topic, but basically, quadrant 1 is urgent and important. And quadrant 2 is not urgent and important. And quadrant 3 is urgent but not important. And quadrant 4, not urgent and not important. And then you can start to look at how you're spending that time. And you can start asking yourself, how efficient were you or how effective were you? Now, like I said, the temptation is to think of your time as 100% spent on task. You did something all day. But Q2 is time invested. And time spent in Q4 is wasted. So let's have a closer look at those. So how do we change from spent time to invested time just by recording it in a cell on a spreadsheet? Because when you're investing, you're working on your business, not in your business. And that's what quadrant 2 is all about. It's those non-urgent important tasks. The work that often gets pushed to one side by quarter 1 and quarter 3 tasks, the urgent tasks, the urgent and important, and the urgent but not important tasks. If you have a to-do list, these are the tasks that keep putting off and put off. The lack of urgency makes them somehow less worthy. Yet this is the thinking that creates our Q1 tasks in the first place. So this is the time you should spend building processes and systems, training and thinking, building processes and thinking about systems. That's your quad 2 tasks. Now, anything in quadrant 4 is wasted, not urgent and not important. The not urgent and not important tasks, however enjoyable may be, is the procrastination zone. And in terms of the time spent in your business, this is where it's wasted. Because when I used to do this, I used to get people to just put, have you spent, invested, or wasted time? There was never any W's. They'd never spent any time doing not urgent and not important tasks. But when we start looking at what was actually done and seeing which quadrant they fit in, you'll find that a great deal of your time is in fact wasted, much more than the ideal 10%. That's great for your time as the business owner. But what about time in the business, especially workshop time? Because this is measured differently from your time, often expressed by names like efficiency and utility. But there's more to it than those stark percentages would have you believe. Utility is simply the time spent working on customers' vehicles, including the non-billable hours. And efficiency is the hours billed as a percentage of the hours worked or of your utility hours. It can be done either way. Now, these figures don't tell you the truth about how time is used in the garage. They do not account for meetings, time waiting for parts, moving cars, waiting for ramp space, putting bits back on cars so they can be moved. Huge amounts of time are wasted by inefficient work practices across the industry, but it's almost impossible to track them due to biases among staff and owners. For example, I worked with a garage that was measuring tech productivity using handheld devices, little tablets. They discovered, after a while, that 1 week per month was spent sweeping up. 40 hours per tech every month. The workshop must have been immaculate, but it wasn't. It was the techs entering sweeping up every time there was a delay on a job. This time obviously wasn't being billed, but it was included in the utility. But the real reason for the delays wasn't being captured. The techs thought they would face disciplinary action if they took too long on jobs, so they fudged the data. This ended up with the owners taken to the CCTV to confirm their suspicions, to find out the techs were working on each vehicle longer than the data was suggesting. The owners wanted to know where they needed to add to the book times, identify training needs, or even buy and invest in new equipment. Instead, they gathered meaningless data that suggested they should hire a cleaner. Workshop time is spent on customers' vehicles, invested in meetings and training, and anything that falls outside of those activities is essentially wasted. Reducing wasted time is critical for garages. Invested time should increase effectiveness and efficiency. The whole point of measuring activity is to pinpoint where improvements are needed. Then time can be spent on the business, building processes and systems. Processes improve efficiency and systems increase effectiveness. Actually working on, not in, the business. Remember, the easiest way to think about it when it comes to the workshop is time spent is anything to do with working on customer vehicles. Invested is training and meetings with decisions, and anything else is wasted. So having identified where time is being wasted is the first step in becoming more productive. Measuring is the easy bit. The hard part is turning waste into value. So I've put together a few examples that have been proven to work in independent garages. And the first one is pre-authorization of work. And this works well for servicing and MOT type work. Using your previous data, a garage can estimate the average invoice for a 10-year-old car being serviced or MOT'd. It's likely to need work to be done beyond the service or MOT. If this work is pre-authorized, the job will be done more quickly and less time wasted. If the parts are not available the same day and the defects aren't dangerous, the vehicle can be returned and booked in again. Now, this is a really good idea for the customers that you know value the service you provide. Probably not something you would do with a first-time customer, but if you explain to them when they booked it in for a service, the service is X number of pounds and it's going to take all morning. However, typical for a car of your age, we normally see a few additional items that need doing as part of the inspection. Do you want us to crack on with them up to a value of the average invoice for that age of car, or do you want us to get in touch with you? Now, a number of your better customers will just say, oh, crack on. They trust you, they know you, they like you. Happy days. You need to build that trust before you can do this, but it does reduce a huge amount of time checking for authorization by pre-authorizing the work. Now, another one, and this one is used a lot, and I know a lot of garages out there will be using this one, is having parts bins and ordering the parts ahead of time. And then having a process where the tech checks the parts are in and correct as much as is practicable before the job commences. The parts are ordered and kept in a box with a vehicle registration number on it until they're needed. And servicing parts are always ordered ahead of time, and where there's a choice of fitment, all options are ordered to ensure less lost time. And the final thing, and this is something that can really turn a business around, and that's daily meetings. The first meeting is in the morning to discuss the jobs that are planned for the day, so every tech knows what is expected of them. And this makes delays obvious and easier to report because they're told each day where they need to be by the end of the day. Because if they're not there, then there's been some form of delay, which means the tech has no real option other than to report it. Which comes to the next meeting, which is the end of day meeting, to return the unused parts, close job cards, and communicate with front of house. These meetings is time invested, and each meeting should take no longer than 15 minutes. The return on that investment will be many times greater than the half hour taken in those meetings. Importantly, the data can be gathered as to why a job is run over during these face-to-face meetings instead of being recorded on a tablet as something trivial as sweeping up. Meetings should always serve a purpose: allocations of jobs and information exchange and decisions made. Meetings with no meaningful outputs are wasted time. So this week's atomic action is to measure how you use your time. Is it being spent, invested, or wasted? Remember, if you should, you must, and what's stopping you is probably starting. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.